Okay, we are ready to jump into phonology. And phonology, or the sound system in our language, module 4, is a biggie. Now, the course that I normally teach in, this element, this phonology element, is a 45-hour 3 credit course. So I am trying to smush the biggest highlights into 1 hour. So uh, I'm ready to take you on this journey. Let's begin. Okay, first things first, you have some vocabulary. Some of this is going to be review and some of it's going to be a preview of what is to come. So just look over this one pager in your notes and make sure you have a familiarity with some of those vocabulary terms. And then we need to set the stage. What that means is, as adults, we come to this work vastly different than our students. So we need to have a little practice in empathy so we can have some appreciation for what we're asking our students to do. This is the word colorful, written in Arabic, and you are going to listen to it. I'll let you listen to it twice, and I would like you to count the sounds or the phonemes you hear in the word.
زاها الألوان.
And again.
زاها الألوان.
So how many sounds were you able to hear in the word colorful? What do you think you would have needed to be able to do that task better? So our students, luckily, come at this with slightly different than the experience you just had because they can speak English, right? They can communicate in English, and you can't communicate in Arabic most likely. So they do have an awareness of the language, and that's awesome. However, they have always been playing with the language in terms of co-articulating all of the words, all of the sounds coming out as one big conglomerate, one sound right on top of the other. And it's very difficult for them to be able to break it up. And that is what our students are coming to us with, this conglomerate of language without the awareness of where one sound ends and one sound begins. So this quote, I think, summarizes why this is such important work, why this is foundational. So phonemes are the basis of good foundational skills reading instruction. They are the basis for 2 reasons. First, they are the smallest units of spoken language that we can perceive. So to understand the language fully, we need to understand what a phoneme is and learn to hear it. More importantly, phonemes help us understand the relationship among the words, letters, and sounds. So as a reminder, we're going to bounce back to that reading brain. This is where that phonological processor is, Broca's area, dealing with pronunciation and articulation, and then again reviewing theory. So here is Scarborough's reading rope. Phonological awareness is going to be down here in the word recognition piece, which deals with phonology. So before we go any further, I would like you to review Idaho Dyslexia's Handbook, pages 18 through 19. I don't want you to do like a deep dive here. Just scan through it because it will just kind of help set the stage about why I'm covering some of the things I'm covering in this module. So go ahead and pause and do that. So we're going to be covering 2 elements here. We're going to just first start with phonetics. And so that's the study of the physical production and the perception of speech sounds in our language. So over here, then we get into phonology, the study of the speech sounds in a language. So they go together really nicely. So why would being aware of these elements as a teacher of any grade level matter? So to help us answer that, I'm going to refer to something that I introduced in the last module. So this is a writing sample from a sophomore in high school. When I worked with this student, because I know this information, I was able to see just from this 5-minute writing sample that there was some phonology. Now, I'm giving you a huge hint on number 4 that this has to do with deal with phonology, but write down in number 4 what your initial thoughts are about what that means. And as we go through this module, I will relate back to this and hopefully tie it all together as we go. So if you could put down an answer in number 4 in your handouts. So now that we've kind of set the stage, talked about why this is important, I'm going to have you work through this pretest on counting the sounds in the following words. So go ahead and do that. That is going to be found on number 5 in your handouts. And then unpause when you're ready to check. All right, let's see how you did. I would say the sounds for you, but it's really hard for them to be picked up by my mic. So I will just show them. Remember, if you see the slash marks, I'm talking about sounds. Those can also be called virgules. You can sometimes see them referenced that way. All right, we are now ready to jump into phonetics. Remember, that is the physical production and perception of the speech sounds. So my first question is, what are the two categories of speech sounds in our language? To help us answer that, I am going to turn to a comedian. This is Gallagher. Gallagher was popular in the 80s. He first was an educator, and a lot of his comedic bits have to do with education. So he is going to help us answer this question. Okay, so I told you this came from the 80s. It is going to look like it came from the 80s. Hopefully the volume comes through okay.
Originally, the alphabet was laid out this way, and this was all of the vowel sounds, A, E, I, O, U, everything you can sing. These are all the real good sounds in the alphabet. The rest of this is just consonants. You can't sing consonants. You can't go.
So what are the two categories of speech sounds? Vowels and consonants. Vowels we can sing, consonants we can't. So my follow-up question is, how many sounds are there in English? I am not asking about letters, I'm asking about sounds. So depending on the source, it's going to always be above 40, generally 44. So with that in mind, we are going to jump into consonants, the sounds we can't sing. All right, here is the consonant chart, accounting for the consonant sounds. Remember, slash marks or virgules equal sound. The first thing we're going to talk about is what it means if two sounds share a box. Well, obviously that means that they share the manner of articulation and place of articulation, but you'll see that one is bolded and one isn't bolded. That is because one is voiced and one isn't voiced. So we need to talk about what that means. Before we can do that, we have to talk about how to produce the consonant sounds. So sometimes when we are really trying hard to emphasize the sounds for our students, we enunciate and add an extra sound. So we call that adding a schwa. So I'll show you what that looks like. Ha, da. I've added a jaw drop to each consonant sound. Our jaw doesn't drop when we say the consonant sounds because there's no sing-song equality. So when we say we're adding a schwa, we're actually adding a vowel sound, and that is what's making the jaw move so much. So I'm going to model how to say those sounds, and then we're going to feel and decide if it's voiced or unvoiced, and we'll talk about what that means. All right, so it's hard for this to be picked up, so I'm going to try really hard. So my jaw didn't drop. Now I'm going to feel my throat. So all of you feel your throats and help me say this T sound. I can't feel anything in my throat. This is an unvoiced sound. So let's try this sound. D, d. I can feel it. I can also tell you it's much easier for the voiced sounds to be picked up on my microphone. So that's what it means when it's sharing a box and one is bolded and one isn't bolded. One is voiced and one isn't voiced. All right, so now we're going to look over here at manner of articulation. So let's start with the stop. The stop sounds are along this row, and they are sounds that cannot be held. They just are said with one puff of air. So we saw that with the two sounds we worked with previously. Then we have our nasals. Now, nasals are going to use our nasal cavity. So it's going to feel silly, but it's the best way. So I am going to start saying this sound, and then I'm going to plug my nose, and you guys can join me, and you can see how this works. So are you ready? Mm, mm. So when I plug my nose, I can't say that sound. That's because it's using our nasal cavity in order to create that raise resonance or that ability to say the sound. All of the sounds along here share that quality. You also probably noticed that I could hold the M sound until I ran out of air. That is another distinguishing quality. So that would be a continuous sound. I can hold it, which is different than those stop sounds that are the one puff. All right. Now we are to fricatives. So we have some friction when we say them. Generally, we can feel some vibration on our tongue or our lips, and it feels tickly. All of the sounds along here share that quality. Now, you might be looking at this TH and TH here, these two sounds being represented, and think, wow, we have two sounds. Yes, we do. We have two sounds. We have one with voicing and one without. So we can try saying it. So say it without, and my microphone can't pick it up. Now I'm going to say it with voicing. Okay, so I was in a kindergarten classroom. They were using CKLA, and the teacher had just gotten done teaching the hard TH sound a couple days before, and she had just started teaching the soft TH sound. And in the middle of her lesson, she asked the students, who has an example of a word that uses the soft TH and soft sound? And I thought she was bonkers because these kids are in kindergarten, and I learned I was the fool because I had she had all these volunteers, and the best answer, the one that I loved the most, was this little girl. You could tell she was thinking really hard, and she said, "Well, my brother's name is Nathan," and she touched her deck, and she knew that that was a soft sound, and so it was really fun to watch that. Those kids were on their way to becoming reading geniuses. They were doing awesome. So both TH sounds are going to be specifically addressed in CKLA. Now over here, I get sometimes some questions about this right here, this ZH. Obviously, we don't write with a ZH in our orthography or our spelling system. However, remember this is sounds. So sh is the unvoiced, and then the ZH here, the spelling here, is representing like treasure. So remember, sounds are being represented on the chart. All right, then we have our affricates, and this one can sometimes be tricky. We need to remember that it has some friction, so there's going to be a little bit of friction going on, and these can't be held as long, so they're not purely stop sounds, but they are not purely continuous sounds, so they are a mix between a stop and a fricative sound. So they're called affricates. That name is one of the harder ones to remember. And those are the ch and j sounds. Here we have our glides. These will always run into a vowel. Now you might be saying this WH. Where we live, we don't have a significant difference between how we pronounce these. Are basically the same. But if we lived in England or other English speaking countries, there is still a difference, but it helps explain why we have the spelling WH in our language. And then we have our liquids. Both of them are voiced, both of them are continuants, and both of them are some of the last sounds for our students to be able to really pin down. And so if you have kids with speech, generally it's going to be in this area that's coming along. The reason why is because they move around in our mouth a lot because they're very influenced by the other sounds around them. All right, so we've done manner of articulation. Now we are up to place of articulation. So all of these are produced with lips together. This one we need to talk about for a minute. So depending on the chart you are looking at, it could be placed in other places. I'm pulling from the Dyslexia Handbook arrangement, so that is why it is placed here, but you could see it other places. Teeth on lip, we can see that there's only two sounds having that feature. Tongue between teeth. This is oftentimes what teachers say the only time you can stick your tongue out at your teacher. And then there's many of these. Tip of tongue raised to bump behind top teeth, so you can practice saying some of these. You can feel that your tongue is coming up behind your teeth. Lips rounded and tongue pulled back, so we're getting a lot of this look going on. Your back of your tongue is lifted. So all of these sounds, your back of your tongue can be kind of, you can feel it in the back. Now let's talk about this sound. So your back nasal sound, sent very back here. And oftentimes in curriculums, it is not handled correctly. They say the NG spelling is a blend when it is not. It is its own distinct consonant sound in our language. And we'll talk about that more as we continue. But it is its own sound. It is not a blend. If you've taught something that has referred to it as a blend, it just didn't have refinement in the phonetics of that background from that curriculum. And then we have a back throaty sound said with our right clear back there with just one sound. So I told you that this information is going to be helpful with analyzing student errors. So I'm going to refer back to my sophomore writing sample, and we're going to see how this might help us. Now you can make errors along any row and any column and within the same box. There's other ways to also have errors, but where we're just getting in at this level, that's generally a good place to begin. Any row, any column, and any shared box. So let me get my writing sample up and we'll analyze it. Okay, so here we go. Now we can see they were making a phonological error with a voicing mistake, right? This is a very smart, like the reason why this information is so great is not only do we understand why they're making the error, but we can see how close they are. That without this knowledge, we would be like, why is this kid continually writing with a T when he needs to use a D? What's going on? Well, it's a very smart mistake. And that is such a reassuring piece of knowledge for our students, especially when they're older, that we can say, oh my goodness, this is a really smart thing that you are trying to do. You're so close. And now I have an avenue to discuss it with him because otherwise I just think it's random. But now I can have a quick discussion about voicing, and now I have a way to discuss it as I see him progressing. And if he needs error correction, we know how to talk about it. So in your handouts, I think it's question 8. You have your own consonant chart and some errors. And what I would like you to do is work through that. There's an error, a target word, and then I want you to write why you think they're making a mistake. And I'd like you to use the consonant chart to help you identify why that mistake might be occurring. Okay, so if you still need some more time, go ahead and pause. So we have Fitch written with instead of fish. We have Chuck instead of chunk and Pam versus Paul. So the reasons, let's look. They confused an affricate for a fricative. So sh and sh are said very similarly, like your mouth looks really similar when you say those. So very smart mistake. Now this one, we are omitting a nasal sound. So I'm going to give you a little quick, this is how I work with students when I see this error. So you're not going to touch the bridge of your nose, just below. And it's going to feel silly, but it is, hopefully you can feel the difference. So I'm going to have you say the air word, the word that they wrote, Chuck. And you don't feel anything when we say that, Chuck. There's nothing. Now we're going to say the word that they were supposed to write, chunk, chunk, chunk. And hopefully you can feel a little bit of vibration in your nose. Chunk. It feels weird, but it is a really useful strategy to get them to see that there is an extra sound that they need to account for. Then we have Pam, and they were supposed to write palm. So those liquid sounds are really difficult, and that's where they are making the error there. So I told you that that back nasal sound, NG is often how we spell that, can be a tricky spot for some curriculums. So I have pulled a kindergarten lesson that does a great job teaching this, and I would like you to look through it and find the phonetic elements. So this is a kindergarten lesson from CKLA. I would like you to look through it and just make notes of the phonetic pieces that you see within the lesson, and then we'll review it together. All right. So before we dive into that lesson, there were a few little tidbits I wanted to give you before we have that discussion. So all nasal sounds can really mess up our vowel sounds, especially our short vowel sounds. That's my first heads up. And then our sounds along the back of tongue lifted column can also do the same thing. So see where that sound is sitting? So our vowel sounds can sometimes really be messed up by this sound. So that's just a quick heads up as we look at that lesson. Okay, so here is the lesson. So in the introduction, they do a nice job of discussing if it's a vowel or a consonant sound. And you need to remember this is pretty far along in their scope and sequence. So they have had these conversations over and over and over again. Sometimes this verbiage can be confusing. So it is a consonant sound made with the mouth closed. That doesn't mean that our mouth is completely closed. What it's talking about is there's some sort of blockage, which we've discussed is your tongue in this sound. So another element, point out the spelling is made up of two letters, reviewing the concept of a digraph if necessary. Explain the NG does not equal N plus G, but stands for a different sound altogether. So this is where it is very distinctive from a traditional basal curriculum. This is not a blend, and it should never have been taught as a blend. So this may be a shift for you, but this is very exciting for me because I have listened to many curriculums teach this in different ways, and this is the most sophisticated and well done way to teach this. So I'm very excited when I see this because it's accurate. This is accurate. All right, so tell students that whenever the spelling NG appears on an activity page for the next few lessons, it will be printed in a darker, bolder ink to remind them that two letters stand for a single sound. So we can definitely dive into lots of phonetic pieces in this lesson. And then we get to where they discuss minimal pairs. This minimal pairs activity is full of phonetic pieces. So they're going to be telling the difference between the N, the N, and the ng and G less sounds. And they're going to have an activity where they're going to hold up which card matches the sound that they are hearing. And then over here in the supports, they even give them some gestures to help tell the difference. So the N would be the nose, and then ng, the back nasal sound is hands up. And you go through this activity. I'm going to read some of the minimal pairs, and I want you to remember what I said about the vowel sounds, what can happen to them. So I'm going to do sun and sung, hang and pan, hang. What happened to the A in pang? Yeah, it's getting morphed, isn't it? It's still the short A sound, just being morphed by the back nasal, and you can really see that with number 5, thin and thing. So it's kind of fun that you can have the conversation both about the N and the NG, which is what this lesson is focusing on. But I have also had teachers teach this lesson and they said, oh my goodness, why all of a sudden is it having them read with long vowel sounds? So it's not, it's still the short vowel sound, but when we blend them together, we get the morphing. So that's what's going on here. That ing sounds like ing, doesn't sound, it sounds like an E sound because of that that back nasal. So I'm also going to address one other thing that comes up when people get to this lesson. And this is insightful no matter what grade level you teach, just because it gives you insight into what this curriculum is working with. So it is a sounds first curriculum. And so it will work a lot on putting the sounds together pretty quickly and having the students be able to blend. And the focus will be as a verb. We're blending, we're putting things together. That's where the emphasis is going to be. Oftentimes in curriculums, you will have it almost treated like a noun. Like these are our set blends that we're going to work through. And so you'll have your S blends, your L blends, and your R blends. That's working with blending as a noun. This pedagogical choice is to focus on blending as a verb. And so they'll start with those CBC words. But then you'll get to CCVC words, and the hope is that the students have had enough mastery with the sounds and the process of putting them together that the CCVC should come along as the teacher has modeled it and showed them how to put those sounds together. So that's just a quick heads up that this is making a pedagogical choice, that the blending is a verb. Blending is not a noun. This is a shared approach with, if you've heard anything about the U-Fly manual from the University of Florida, they make the same choice. So that is a quick heads up there that might be a little bit different, but again, sounds first approach and building on blending as a verb. All right, so we are wrapping up the consonants and jumping into vowels. Welcome to the Vowel Valley. I do not love all the key words and key pictures on this image, but what I did love was the background because it is taking the shape of a valley, a mountain valley, and the valley is purposeful. It is following the jaw as we go through all these sounds. So I'll model this once and then you can join me. I'm going to start with a smiley face up here, down into this area. I'm going to be in that like doctor shape. And then I'm going to go up into a pursed lip. So I like to have my hand underneath my chin so I can feel the difference. E, I, A, I, aw, aw, o, u. Now, some of you may have thought this ah and this ah sound mighty familiar or mighty similar. That's accurate because of where we live. Now, if we lived in Boston, it would be different. So we're going to do it one more time, and then we'll talk about a few little things. Are you ready? You're going to do it with me. Feel your chin as we go through. E, I, A, I, aw, aw, o, u. Very nice. So if we have students that are being confused between the aw and the it's really easy to use articulation to help have that conversation about the vast difference. However, if we have kids with the and an it confusion, which is the most common place kids get confused, they're much closer together. But we can still feel a chin drop. So let's say eh, there's a slight difference. But one of my favorite ways, and I know this isn't the purpose of this course, but I'm going to give you some tips and tricks while we're going through it as I can. I like kids to feel their cheeks. And so we're going to say and it's going to feel pretty smiley, like you can feel that smiley feeling in your face. So and now say eh. Their cheeks are completely different. All right, now off to the sides, we have two other areas. We have our vowel R's or our R controls, and those are off to the side because they are a mixture with a consonant sound. And then we have our diphthongs. So dip means two, or die means two. And we are going to have two mouth movements when we say these. So oi, two mouth movements, ow, two mouth movements. So that's why they're off to the side. So I'm going to jump up here where we have those pursed lip sounds where I'm circling. We have the oo and the u. Both of these sounds are associated with the long U. And in a lot of our curriculums, they are not distinctly addressed. You'll see some lessons where both sounds are kind of mushed together and never taught to the children that there are two separate sounds for the long U. So what's cool is that in CKLA, both elements are going to be addressed, both sounds. So here we have the U sound and how it is often spelled. And then we have the oo sound, and you can see these long U spelling patterns are associated here. So it's kind of nice to see that refinement. So when we talk about that long U sound, how many sounds does it have? It has two sounds. It's kind of tricky. Ooh and you. All right, so This is a kind of a nice way to summarize what we've just been through. We've gone through the consonant chart and the vowel valley, and I would like you to look over these cards and try to figure out what the color coding might mean. All right, so what do you think? Why do you think they're color coded this way? So the vowel sounds will always be written in green because when we say a vowel sound, the mouth has less obstruction, so the sounds can just go. The R controlled or vowel R are written in a different color of blue to show that they are a combination of a vowel sound and a consonant. And then we have our consonant sounds. Consonant sounds are always written in red on the spelling cards because when saying a consonant sound, parts of the mouth touch or are closed, blocking or stopping some of the air. So it's kind of fun to see the color coding coming through, pulling from what we've just learned about phonetics. Congratulations, you have just finished the phonetic portion of this module, and we will now jump into phonology, remembering the study of speech sounds. And there are some terms we're going to go over. So there's phonological awareness, phonological sensitivity, and phonemic or phoneme awareness. So here's an image that might help. So phonological awareness is going to encompass all of the pieces, all of the parts here. Phonological sensitivity is when we're dealing with larger units in our language. So word awareness, like counting words in some sentences, rhyme and syllables, those are dealing with larger chunks. Once we get to the individual sounds, we are now dealing with phoneme or phonemic awareness. So we can segment sounds, we can blend sounds, and then we have substitution and manipulation. So when we think about reading ability, reading skill is more closely related with phonemic awareness tasks, and we'll discuss this further as we go along. So to help drive home the difference between phonological sensitivity and phonemic awareness tasks, we have this quick little activity we are going to do. So I am going to say some sentences, and I want you to answer these questions. Here it is. Are you ready? What is your name? It is nice to meet you. So how many sentences did you hear? All right, now listen for how many words. What is your name? It is nice to meet you. We have how many syllables? What is your name? It is nice to meet you. Each word was just one syllable, so that made it pretty easy. So now I want you to count how many phonemes or sounds. What is your name? It is nice to meet you. All right, so that one's a lot harder. There was 22. So hopefully that gives you insight into phonological sensitivity to phoneme awareness tasks. So remember, phoneme awareness tasks give us more bang for our buck with reading ability. However, there's a lot to gain from phonological sensitivity tasks. You can think about working memory exercises, and rhyme and all that kind of work is fun to do when our children are little, and being able to have that fun element is also important. But we can also think about working memory when we think about phonological sensitivity. So they all have their place, but when we're thinking about reading ability, and this is a quote I want to get to, phonological sensitivity instruction is neither a prerequisite nor a causal factor in the development of phonemic awareness. So you don't need rhyme in order to read. You need phonemic awareness, the ability to segment and blend especially. So if you want to hear more from Dr. Susan Brady, I will have a recording from her at the end of this module if you'd like to explore that. So here's a quick little segmentation activity from kindergarten. You can see how they're using their palm to count. One of the most important things is just making sure that you're going left to right with your students. So making sure they're following the way we read left to right. But this is kind of a nice little overview of what a foundational skill activity looks like from the curriculum. Okay, and now you have on question 12 an activity where you are going to figure out if it is phonological sensitivity or phoneme awareness. So go ahead and work through that, and then we'll talk about it. So go ahead and pause. Okay, so blending the sounds k, at. That would be a phoneme awareness task because I'm dealing with individual sound. Say the word cupcake, now don't say cup. Now I'm dealing with larger chunks of language, so this is a phonological sensitivity task. So segment the following word, nut. So now I am dealing with the individual sounds again, so phoneme awareness. All right, so we are going to jump into a first grade classroom by video. This teacher has just got done reviewing the oo and the ow sounds with her class, and she's going to do a quick activity with them. While you're watching, I want you to think of what evidence do you see of phonemic awareness? And then this follow-up question, are these students still using phonemic awareness skills even though they're using letters? So in your handouts, right before question 14, there's some italicized words. This audio isn't great, and so my workaround was to provide you a list of what she's going to say so you can follow along between what the kids are doing and the italicized portion there. You should be able to be fine.
The first word I want you to build is boot. Boot. Like Miss Gordon has on a boot. Turn it to the lowercase side. That's all. Good job. Agree, disagree? Agree. Change boot into bout. Bout. Agree, disagree? Agree. Change bout into shout. Agree, disagree? Agree. Change shout into shoot. Agree, disagree? Agree. Change shoot into root. 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 Agree, disagree? Agree. Change root into womb. Womb. Womb.
So did you guys see any elements of phonemic awareness? Those kids really had to think which person needed to go up and which person needed to move. And you could even see it that last little bit where there was a mistake made, and when the teacher repeated it, that they were able to fix it. So they're obviously thinking about the individual phonemes in the word and trying to represent it accurately using the appropriate spelling. So these kids are definitely still using phonemic awareness skills. They're just also using some spelling and refinement with graphemes and some phonics skills going on there, right? And so that gives us a lot of bang for our buck. Now, this is a completely appropriate place for kids in first grade to work. So they've built up to being able to do this manipulation using the spelling patterns. So hopefully that has helped with some ideas about phonemic awareness. And we are going to jump in and talk about our language a little bit more deeply. So in kindergarten and first grade, we start off teaching the pure and sweet, simple, clear sounds each consonant sound makes. So this sound is always taught really clearly with a very simple CVC word. We're able to really blend that nicely at the beginning of kindergarten and first grade. But what quickly happens with our poor students is we now all of a sudden start putting these sounds next to different letters, and they don't quite sound as pure and sweet and simple as they did when we first started. So we're going to look at one quick example. So we have the t sound here, or is it ch? What happens when we all of a sudden want a kid to spell truck? They often spell it with the CH, spelling it chuck. Why is that? Well, it has to do with co-articulation. So we are taking a stop sound, if you refer back to that consonant chart, and we are putting it next to a liquid sound, which I told you moves around in our mouth and isn't easy to pin down. So when we say her, I want you to pay attention to what our lips are looking like. We're kind of having this rounded lip shape. Now what are you doing with you have this the CH? It's the same shape. That's why they're getting confused. They're not hearing it incorrectly. That's actually the way we pronounce it because of co-articulation. And they're getting confused because of how we pronounce those sounds together. So here's a little image of that sound CH, but very much looks like that TR. So if you're working with a colleague and you're working through this course, you could pause and do the TR blend and the CH and see how that's feeling. So this is the whole reason I'm doing this is to introduce this concept that once we get more sounds put together, our language isn't pure and sweet and simple. And one of the biggest ways that happens in English is dun 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 the schwa. So the schwa is like a lazy vowel sound. It is the most common vowel sound. So if you would have paid attention to that vowel valley, we had a schwa in the middle. The schwa is the most common vowel sound, and it is this lazy, unaccented sound. It's usually sounds like an or an I is most often. But we're going to go through this and talk about it, and that will be the schwa will be the last part of this module. So we can't talk about the schwa without talking about how we speak a stress-timed language. So the easiest way to do this is to compare it to a syllable timed language. So we're going to use Spanish. So in Spanish, each syllable gets one clear beat. Each syllable is emphasized, and that's why it's going to be a little bit easier to spell because each sound gets a clear, distinct emphasis in general. And then we compare that to English. In English, the most important words in our sentence are going to be said a little bit longer and a little bit more clearly, and then the rest of the words will be said a little bit quicker. So at the sentence level, we can see that we have different words getting different emphasis depending on their importance, which is very different than a syllable timed language where every syllable gets the same beat. Now we can take that from the sentence level to the word level. So we do not speak like robots in English. So the word family would be incorrect. That's not how we pronounce it. We pronounce it family. We don't say parrot. We say parrot. We don't say Alaska. We say Alaska. So hopefully that gives you a quick overview of what the schwa is in our language, both at the sentence level, but then at the word level. And then think about how this adds some complexity as we enter into multisyllabic words. So why can't I just tell a kid, especially if they're older, working with multisyllabic words, sound it out? Well, because of the stress patterns in our language, the sounds aren't always going to match up with the way we spell it. And so that's not quite fair when we're working with multisyllabic words. So what I have for us here is we are going to pick out where the schwa is in these words. So I've done the first one, algebra, right? So we have two schwas. The emphasis is falling on this syllable. So go ahead and do the last three. It's on page 7, I believe, in your handouts. All right, so let's look and see how you did. Illustrate, about, emphasis. So I wish I would have saved. These words actually came from a student I was working with, and he spelled every single schwa incorrectly, which is completely appropriate, right? Because it's hard. But it would have been a great time to actually look at a student sample. But here we go. We have those schwas. To build off of this, we are going to look at a second grade CKLA lesson where they introduce schwa. So I'm going to pull up that lesson so you can see where to look. So you can look over the introduction. And then the story, the spelling spoilers, is where you're going to want to spend most of your time. So go ahead and look that over in the files and then pop back in when you are done. Okay, so I hope that was helpful to see how the introduction to the schwa will take place in second grade, and then they'll continue working with that going on up. All right, so that was our quick schwa piece, and now you are to your post test. So this is on, I think, around page 8 in your handout. So go ahead and take your post test on how many sounds there are, and then I will show you the answers. So go ahead and pause and give yourself some time. All right, so let's look at the answers. Psychology has 8, Scratch has 5, Each has 2, Chalk has 3, Exit has 5. Now this X may have been an area of confusion. If you remembered, there wasn't any X on our consonant chart because it is a combination sound between the two sounds I am circling right here. All right, so you have some notes in your handouts going over teaching phoneme awareness and then some activities. So I would like you to go ahead and look that over, and then we will wrap up this module. So go ahead and do that, and then unpause when you're ready to continue. All right. So here we are at the end. Everyone is going to look over the dyslexia handbook pages. It's a nice summary of what we have just done. And then we're going to do the student profile question 20 in your handouts together. In this module, I tried to stuff as much of the good stuff as I could in it. But if you are interested and you would like more information, this is a video by Dr. Susan Brady, who I referenced earlier. Then there's an article by Dr. Louisa Moats. And then this article by Clemens is called They Say You Can Do Phonemic Instruction, Awareness Instruction in the Dark, but Should You? So if those are of interest to you, you can explore them on your own time, but they're not a requirement for this course. So we are going to go into question 20, the last page of your handouts. So you will see a student sample here. It's a 9th grader writing about the Great Gatsby. In this column, I would like you to write the word the student wrote and how they wrote it, and then the word they meant to write. And then I want you to write if you think it's phonological or not in this area. So hopefully you've had some time to work through that. So I will go ahead and we will discuss it. So millionaire versus millionaire. So that is a phonological error. There's nasal confusions going on here. We have though and though. That isn't a phonological error. They are accounting for all the sounds. They just don't have the right spelling pattern. A lot would be in the same category here. Have this, they are accounting for all the sounds. Here we have wetted versus wanted. So we're getting a nasal emission. And then we see this ED, right, is not being accounted for correctly. So that's getting us into morphology work. Later on, we'll get into that. And then we have fid versus find. We have another nasal emission. And then could and could. They're accounting for the sounds. They just don't have the correct spelling. So that is not a phonological confusion. So we see from this sample, the student has a lot of problems with nasals. I chose this because this is common to have problems with those two nasal sounds. And so we are going to think about how we could help the student with what we have learned. So think about what we know about those sounds and what could we use to help them. So go ahead and think about that for a minute and unpause when you're ready to continue. All right, so one of the easiest ways to have this conversation is to begin with where and how these sounds are said. So these have a different place of articulation. The said with lips together, and the n does not have lips together. That is a really easy way to start having this conversation. So that wraps up this huge module. Thank you for sticking with me. And when we get together next time, we will discuss orthography or the spelling or written system of our language. Thank you so much for all of your work so far in this course, and I look forward to having a discussion about our spelling system.